You're listening to a guy that penned a letter of recommendation for O.J. Simpson to hand to St. Peter. It's Tim Graham and Friends.
CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
And now, back to the man who's never afraid to throw virtual hands, the social media samurai, the tyrant of Twitter, the keyboard snatcher of souls, Tim Graham and Friends.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. We are 6 sessions into Bills training camp, which means they're pretty much halfway done already in this condensed version of St. John Fisher University camp. And, you know, it's certainly a far cry from the days when Doug Marrone was out there for a month and a half or 2 months or whatever it was when the Bills played in the Hall of Fame game. And yeah, it was used to be a lot longer out there. And then also with the days off baked in, the NFLPA mandated or CBA mandated days off after every 3 practices. And then the Bills practicing in Orchard Park on Friday. That's open to the public if you want to attend that. This training camp is almost over, it seems. Jonah, we've both been out there. I go out there more for the interviews, but the features that I'm working on. I'm not the type to dissect every play in camp for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's too much to look at. Number two, they weren't in pads until yesterday, that being Monday. It's too soon. It's too reactive. Everything is, you're probably not looking at things or noticing things that are really important and overemphasizing things that aren't important at all. You can read too much into it. So I try to divorce myself from that craving of micro analyzing every play or every rep that I see against air, without pads, in shorts, fill in the blank. With the caveat. But we have been out there. We've been exposed to some things. Generally what I like to do, and I know that I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I'm out there and I'll talk to people. Me observing things is what the hell do I know? I talk to people I trust in their eyes. I don't know. What have you noticed out there, Jonah, about the workouts?
Well, they're practicing football. I mean, as you have said, I don't like to overanalyze things. It's not a competition, even though there are roster battles and there is competition for roster spots, and they're competing on every rep and every play as football players. I think much too much is made of what happens on these practice fields that we can see with our own eyes and what that means for the 53-man roster and the season ahead, when a lot of this is practice and they're working on things and then they go back and they review the film. There's walkthrough sessions that we can't see. There's film sessions and meetings. After training camp, there's 2 weeks of practice back at Orchard Park that comes before the cut day. There's 3 preseason games. There's been OTAs. We see 1 OTA practice, 1 out of each of the 3 sessions of OTAs. There's 2 that we don't see. So there's a lot going on that isn't public, that the media doesn't see and the fans definitely don't see. All that said, it is
can be dangerous to read too much into things.
Well, you can fool yourself. And the more you're out there, I think the more you get impressed by what you see. You get a really up close look at the players, and you can maybe get more impressed um, just by the size and speed and sheer physicality of professional athletes and NFL players. But I do think that's part of the fun, especially for the fans who don't get opportunities to see this team very often. And maybe you get one training camp ticket, and you do like to make your own notes and mental observations. And if somebody who catches your eye as a practice makes the roster, you can feel a little bit like you discovered this gem. And in the media, we tend to do that as well. And there are a lot of observations and takeaways and notes and things to write and take away and note and observe from what's going on in the practices. But I think when you look back, when we get into week one or even on cut down day and you look back at training camp, not everything that happened and not every of the ups and downs and battles and things like that play into exactly what happens in the season. I think I said to somebody the other day, nothing really matters until week one. A lot of what you think you see and whether the Bills look good in training camp isn't too predictive of whether they're going to look good in the regular season and whether they're going to look good at the end of the regular season and into the postseason. But you can get a feel for the vibes and the chemistry and the culture around the team, talking to people and observing the interviews and doing your own interviews and kind of getting a feeling for how this team thinks and feels about itself from being out there and analyzing training camp in totality.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And it's I think that the most significant part of what we're able to observe or monitor during training camp are the injuries, who is stepping up when somebody goes down, who's getting first team reps, that type of thing. And I think that one of the positions that has been most fascinating to me, not receiver, but safety. And what's going to happen with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer no longer on the team. Of course, Taylor Rapp elevating to that spot. He was the third best safety on the team last year. They re-signed him, obviously with him as a fixture in mind. And then they signed Mike Edwards from the Chiefs, a veteran who has been out with a hamstring injury. He is week to week. Cole Bishop, the rookie second-round pick that everybody's excited to see. He got hurt today. His arm was heavily wrapped after practice. So Damar Hamlin's been getting some first-team reps. Carry back to mini camp and OTAs when Sean McDermott was saying a lot of very nice things. There was a lot of praise to go around for Damar Hamlin, finding that next level, maybe picking up from where he would have left off without the cardiac arrest at the end of 2022. His 2023 has an asterisk on it, and he started those games in 2022. Last year, he's admitting, and the Bills are talking out loud about how it was very much a uncharted territory for him. Every step along the way was fraught with anxiety. There was nervousness, yes, emotion. Even the happy parts were very emotional and, a bit of a distraction. And now he's back to playing football and doing all the types of things that probably were interrupted in his arc, that there's been an interval, and now he's able to maybe build on 2022 in a much more genuine way than he could have last year, and getting those first team reps. Who's to say that Damar Hamlin, who looked like a very much a fringe member of the Bills roster last season, not playing on most weeks, not dressing on some weeks, could be very much in the mix here as the summer unfolds. The Bills also signing Kareem Jackson, the former Houston Texan, and Denver Bronco, most notably though of the Houston Texans. He's 36. He turned 36 in April. You pointed out that's older than Micah Hyde. Is that to say, Jonah, that the Bills are passing on bringing Micah Hyde in, or maybe Micah Hyde's made a decision? We don't know that, but I think it's something to consider if the Bills are willing to bring in somebody who doesn't know their system and their values for somebody who's older than Micah Hyde and who had a bit of a checkered 2023. He was suspended or kicked out of a couple of games last year. He was a headhunter. He went 4 straight games, I think, with 15-yard penalties. Again, I mentioned the ejections. I think the league suspended him. And it's an interesting signing. Just your thoughts on the safety position from what you've seen.
Well, I'll start with Micah Hyde. I mean, that was my immediate thought when Mike Edwards got hurt with the hamstring injury 2 days ago after missing much of the minicamp recovering from shoulder surgery, and that was maybe the time to send the bat signal out for Micah Hyde, that maybe there wasn't a spot on the roster for him going into training camp, but with an injured safety, there could be an opening here. However, Mike Edwards is week to week. It's kind of believed that this hamstring is going to keep him out maybe for the rest of training camp, but not much longer than a couple of weeks. So it isn't something where, as we know right now, where he's going to miss multiple games in the regular season. And I don't know if there's a spot for Micah Hyde if he's not coming back into a starting position or a prominent position on the team. Kareem Jackson now has an opportunity to show what he can do and maybe make the team, but I don't know if he's necessarily coming in here to be a starting safety. Damar Hamlin, potentially Cole Bishop, because Kareem Jackson was signed before Cole Bishop got hurt, would probably get those opportunities ahead of him. I still think there's the potential of Micah Hyde rejoining this team. Maybe, I don't know this, I'm not reporting this, but maybe he doesn't want to participate in the training camp, and he would be somebody that kind of joins the program when they get back to Orchard Park, or potentially someone that gets signed into the season after week one, when his contract wouldn't be guaranteed, or even, kind of like how different veterans have joined the Bills, Josh Norman and some guys during the season that have come in and started on the practice squad and ramped their way up to being players that are kind of mid-season acquisitions and reinforcements for the late season and into the postseason. Or Micah Hyde's going to retire. I find it curious that he has not retired yet. It seems rather late in the offseason for somebody who's not deciding to play football to make that decision. That usually comes much earlier, but AJ Klein announced his retirement today. So maybe there will be a day coming up soon when Micah Hyde does that. What I have never really been able to figure out, if Micah Hyde not being on the Bills roster is a decision that the Bills have made, or if Micah Hyde has told them he's not ready to make that commitment and not ready to sign with an NFL team. It's probably a combination of both, but there did seem to be an opening there with the Mike Edwards injury. As you laid out, it's a bigger opening for Damar Hamlin, who is now in his fourth year with the team. He knows the defense, knows specifically kind of what they expect of the safeties with the disguises and the different things that the safeties do in Sean McDermott's defense. He started all those games in 2022. Last year was a bit of a reset year mentally and physically. I don't know if it was something that made a lot of sense for him to play a lot of games and a lot of snaps last season, especially early last season. I think it was maybe intentional that he was on the team, but not in a featured role on the team a year ago. And now he seems to be past that, especially mentally, and competing to be a real player on this team who plays a lot and doesn't shy away from contact. He had a strong mini camp performance from what we saw in those mini camp practices. He was with the first team at the very start of training camp, rotating with Mike Edwards. If you go back to last year's training camp, he was on the second team with Taylor Rapp, so he has some of that chemistry and ability to be an interchangeable piece with Taylor Rapp. Maybe they have some experience there. But Sean McDermott did say that Mike Edwards was signed and projected to probably be a starting safety, at least somebody they wanted to give that opportunity and look to. On the second day of training camp, he kind of got those reps and that work as a starting safety. Cole Bishop was drafted to probably be a starting safety at some point, even if that doesn't happen right away and doesn't even happen at any point in his rookie year. I think that they projected he will be in that spot eventually. So I don't know if there's a lot of moving parts there. And I think in the end, Cole Bishop's probably going to be a starting safety at the end of the year going into next year. And Taylor Rapp is, I'd say, entrenched in that position. So while there does seem to be a lot of competition, it might be working towards a predetermined end by the end of all this.
And the Bills have dealt with this before at the safety position. They've gotten guys reps each of the previous two seasons because Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer would get hurt in camp. And part of the reason why I think they weren't brought back, or at least why they passed on Jordan Poyer, who clearly wanted to resume his career by signing with the Miami Dolphins. We don't really know for sure what's going through Micah Hyde's mind regarding retirement, or whether he wants to come back and the Bills don't want him, or what the degree of interest is going in either direction. But we do know that, the age clearly has played a factor in both of those guys not being on the team anymore. Their bodies have eroded, and they eroded in training camp. enough that other players were able to get those reps. And so the Bills are dealing with it now. I'm sure they would love for everybody to be healthy and out there, particularly Mike Edwards and Cole Bishop, two new faces who they'd love to, absorb the defense, working with new defensive backs coaches. Bobby Babich is the defensive coordinator, but still it's Sean McDermott's system, and safeties will always be critically important in Sean McDermott's defensive philosophy. But anyway, I guess the point I'm making is that they're used to this. They're used to guys, cycling them through there, getting them a good look, getting them some experience at St. John Fisher in the preseason games, with an eye towards the guys that they really need being healthy on opening day. I do want to mention Kareem Jackson. I think I said 4 straight games in which he had a 15-yard penalty. It was 3 of the first 4 games. And then again, he had one a few weeks after that, but he was suspended twice in 2023 for doing stupid stuff on the field. And so it'll be interesting to see what the Bills, if they really do have long-term plans for Kareem Jackson, and if he turns into an important player.
One thing we haven't seen that the Bills have done in the past is we haven't seen Cam Lewis play any safety so far in training camp. We haven't seen Jamarcus Ingram go there.
But we know he could do it.
We know he can do it, but Jamarcus Ingram has some experience at that position going back to his time at UB. And I think a little bit in his tenure with the Bills, it seems like those guys are locked into their cornerback, or in Cam Lewis's case, I think nickelback position, and that the Bills are trying out different players at safety. That maybe that's a move you make in the regular season when they're down to only 53 players on the roster, but it doesn't seem like a move that they're looking to make right now.
Also on the health front, we should mention that offensive lineman Alec Anderson was taken away by ambulance today because of heat-related issues, went to the hospital. The Bills put out a statement that they're monitoring him. He's in good spirits, and it doesn't seem, at least based on the statement anyway, that it's maybe not as scary as folks might have thought whenever you see somebody taken away in an ambulance from a football field, especially with the heat the way that it's been out in Pittsford. Alec Anderson on the roster all of 2023, but did not play. He was on the 53-man roster, just inactive for every game. And then the year prior to that, he was on the Bills practice squad, an undrafted player out of UCLA. So unclear what the Bills' plans are for Alec Anderson, but obviously they liked him well enough to keep him on the roster and protected so that other teams couldn't go and get him. And with differences happening on the line, and Mitch Morse not around anymore, and Ryan Bates no longer around, Alec Anderson, of course, somebody that you would look at based on the Bills, how they value him, or showed that they valued him last season, that he may have had an elevated role this season, and still may. Obviously, you can recover from a heat-related issue. Hopefully it wasn't anything more than that. The wide receiver position, Jonah. Did you want to say something about
curious.
the line?
I know. No, I wanted to ask you something about heat illness. I know it happens. I know it happens around the country in high school, college, professional. It happened to NFL players before, but I can't recall something like this happening at a Bills training camp that I've covered or I've been aware of. How much have you seen that?
It doesn't ring a bell with me. That's not to say it hasn't happened, but it doesn't ring a bell. They have the cool down tents there. I know that, players are big with the ice baths afterwards, but everybody's extra proactive in the NFL, going back to obviously the Corey Stringer tragedy, that the implementation, things were implemented, and I'll spit it out. Protocols were implemented to handle these types of situations and to be aggressive in treating them. So, but no, that doesn't, I don't recall that. And that's not to say because it's where we are in geographically, and it doesn't get hot at St. John Fisher. There've been some brutally hot summers for Bills training camp, so they face pretty adverse conditions. It's not easy. The wide receivers, Jonah, Chase Claypool, he's had some issues. Got into a little skirmish earlier in camp. He's got the toe injury. He was unable to finish a couple of practices already. And again, the skill set and all that type of stuff, what he's been able to do very early in his career with the Steelers, but then really not being able to stick with anybody else and bouncing around to the point that the Bills signed him for a $25,000 signing bonus. I mean, I don't know that we can get some money together, start a collection or a GoFundMe, and hire Chase Claypool to do some yard work for us, and it's kind of a collective. But a $25,000 signing bonus for a pedigreed player like he is out of Notre Dame, and the electric start that he got off to with the Steelers, doesn't seem like he's making the most of his opportunity so far.
No, and neither up until today had been Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And I wasn't out there today because I went to UB football's first training camp practice, fall camp practice. But I did read that Marquez Valdez-Scantling had at least one big play that, showed up in the observations report. But those are two big name veteran acquisitions that, Chase Claypool was the star of at least one of the OTA sessions. Sean McDermott had praised him in a press conference, and then he was making touchdown catches, and everybody kind of thought that maybe this was a steal that the Bills got late in free agency. And I think that was before Marquez Valdez-Scantling was signed. And then it looked like another, nice late addition, at least a speedster that the Bills have added. But neither one of those guys have impressed as much as a young player like Tyrell Shavers. And I don't think, I'm not keeping detailed tallies in my notes like some other people are, but I don't think they're even getting reps with the first team quite as much as Tyrell Shavers and some of these younger wide receivers have been. And independent of all that, the offense, the way that lines up, you're competing for the fifth or sixth wide receiver spot. You're going to have a special teams role. And I don't know if Chase Claypool or Marquez Valdez-Scantling has that kind of history in the league. And it just doesn't seem like they would be kept on the team for special teams purposes, where Tyrell Shavers, Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, maybe if it's even with them with what they can bring to the offense, those guys can do things on special teams and maybe have more willingness to play special teams. And that would play more a role into getting them that fifth or sixth spot on the wide receiver depth chart in the 53-man roster.
Claypool did play some special teams last year. He wasn't too thrilled with it, but admitted that he did come around to appreciate special teams because maybe he needed to rediscover his love for football after his inability to remain employed. So you have that aspect of things, but I think, Mac Hollins, the Bills love him. They're putting him out there for the news conferences. I think that is an indication that they like this guy enough. I don't think the fly-by-night players go to the tent to have the media talk to them. Usually, if Mac Hollins is going to be one of the featured players to be interviewed after practice, I think that that's an indicator that he's not on the bubble, even though I occasionally see him reported by various outlets that Mac Hollins might be a fringe player, might not make the roster. I think that the Bills very much feel that he is in their plans. He's a big special teamer.
Yeah, he's on the team. Josh Allen has kind of mentioned how much he favors him and has been throwing to him. He's played a lot of first team reps. I think the top four is pretty locked in with Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakur, and Mac Hollins. And the Bills only kept 5 receivers last year. Maybe there's an argument to keep 6 this year, but I think the competitions are for that 5th and 6th spot.
Yeah, Justin Shorter needs to stay healthy. Perhaps he can make an impression here as the weeks roll on. But Tyrell Shavers is a name that keeps popping up. He does make plays, and that's again, I said at the beginning of the podcast, I don't keep meticulous notes on plays, 7-on-7 drills and things. I don't put too much weight on it, but Tyrell Shavers is somebody who has been conspicuous out there in good ways.
One thing I did just look up related to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, if the Bills were to cut him, they would take a $2.25 million dead cap hit, which is the same as his cap hit for being on the team. That might be a factor in deciding to keep him on the roster. And even as good as Tyrell Shavers has looked in these first 6 practices, as we said before, there's a lot more. There's preseason and there's perception around the league. If the Bills think that they can cut him and bring him back on the practice squad again and keep him in the program without giving him one of those roster spots, and maybe they can't do that with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who's a proven NFL player that, certain things that he can do. Even if Tyrell Shavers is the darling of training camp in some of the preseason, that still might not, make a big difference in when they're putting together the depth chart.
And that speaks to what we were saying about getting too excited about a player, or when you see a small sample size or even a larger sample size. Every year there are 2 or 3 players who look great and they don't make the team. And not only that, but they never make it in the NFL. They look good because you happen to be watching them. They catch your eye once or twice. Maybe you get some confirmation bias and you're looking extra hard for that diamond in the rough. And they put up some stats even in the preseason games. And then they don't make their 53-man roster, and they don't make anybody else's 53-man roster. And 3 years later, they're not even in the league anymore. It happens every summer. And it's something to be extra careful about when weighing who's going to make what spots. And experience does matter quite a bit. Contract matters quite a bit. Your ability to do a bunch of different things matters. There's way more to it.
I'll tell you, can I mention one other player that's caught my eye? Because this goes back to OTAs and mini camps. I think tight end Zach Davidson has made a play just about every time we were there in the spring, and that's continued at least into some of the training camp practices that I've watched. I think that's an important thing to note, because if the Bills want to run these 2 tight end sets a lot with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, but if there's an injury, last year when that happened, they got out of the 2 tight end sets when Dawson Knox was hurt. Quentin Morris had a role on the team, but wasn't quite the same pass catcher that those 2 guys are. And Zach Davidson is a receiver type, tall and kind of quick moving tight end. And I think if he can continue to impress, he might fit better as a backup tight end and somebody that can come in and replace one of the top 2 tight ends in an injury situation. And I got to think that the coaches are as impressed as we have been with seeing how many times he gets open and makes touchdown catches, usually with the second team, but he just seems like a talented receiver.
The Buffalo Sabres have made a couple of moves since we've last podcasted, signing 2 extensions, Beck Malenstein, and more importantly, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Luukkonen, 5 years, $23.75 million. What's the Sabres fans have to be agitated because clearly the Sabres are done. There's not much left you can do right now in your offseason. The hope for a big trade, or maybe they didn't make that signing when free agency opened, the idea that there could be a move in the works, or they're plotting pieces, they're moving their chess pieces around. It's probably not coming. And this is the team. This is your 2024-2025 Buffalo Sabres. It's Lindy Ruff is the big acquisition. And will that be enough? We see Lindy Ruff on the videos, the promos, calling to ask people to renew their season tickets. Different packages being sold. The Sabres are marketing, all kinds of different ways that you can come to the games, a 10-pack or a weekend pack, or the different premier games you can get in a package. I'm not sure how often they've done that. I know that they've done packs, but to go down the line with just the weekend games, or it's just, I don't know, Jonah. I don't know. I feel I'm depressed for Sabres fans.
Well, there's one more small piece of business that could potentially expand into something bigger, and that's Peyton Krebs is still unsigned as a restricted free agent and going into arbitration, and they could maybe agree to a contract with him, and maybe Peyton Krebs could be traded. He could, kind of come to an understanding with that the contract he wants, he'd get somewhere else, and maybe the Sabres get a better player there. But even if you factor his deal into, they have about $8.5 million in cap space right now. You say $1.5 to $2.5 million to sign Peyton Krebs, perhaps, whatever that lands on. That kind of lines up to the cap space that they still have available is not only the cap space that they've kept open for the past year or two, but it's the cap space that was gained by buying out Jeff Skinner's contract. So if you're kind of comparing to last season, they need this top 6 winger. They bought out Jeff Skinner, who had been a top line winger for the past number of seasons. They never really replaced him. Jason Zucker is maybe that player that's going to take that spot in the lineup, but isn't as dynamic of a goal scorer. And I think a lot of Sabres fans are hoping that there's another move to be made, another opportunity to add a top six winger. And maybe that happens in season or towards the trade deadline. It could happen tomorrow, although the timing doesn't seem, perfect for making that type of trade. But the Sabres do have the assets and the cap room to take on a high salary player from another team at some point in time. But as you mentioned, it does sort of seem like the Sabres are done with their offseason, and they didn't make the marquee acquisition, and they didn't use all of their cap space, and they didn't use the cap space that was gained from Jeff Skinner, because if you didn't buy him out, he didn't want to agree to a trade at that point in the offseason. But maybe if you bring him into the season and he's not playing, or he's playing on the fourth line, that changes some of his motivation. And even just the buyout structure, if you kept him for one more year, you save a little bit down the line, because those cap hits are going to jump up in year 2 and year 3 of that buyout. So if you were excited about the Jeff Skinner buyout, that hasn't really paid off for the Sabres yet. I do like some of the fringe moves they've made in upgrading the bottom 6 forwards. And I think that even just the addition of Lindy Ruff and the added structure and way that the Sabres are going to play is going to bring out some better elements of the players that they brought back, along with the new players and the toughness that they added. I think on the margins, the Sabres are going to be a better team next season and more competitive, harder to play against, as Kevin Adams keeps liking to remind us that was his goal of this offseason. But they haven't made the big move that excites the fan base and really gets you believing that this is the year they're going for it and they're breaking through into the playoffs. There's still, I think, some anxiety from fans that I think a lot of the anxiety stems from not spending to the cap and this belief that there might be some kind of internal cap. I don't believe that to be the case, because if you look at the actual cash of the contracts, a lot of this has to do with Rasmus Dahlin's contract. The Sabres are going to be paying more than the salary cap. So if they have an internal salary cap, it's not really working out that well, because cash-wise, they're spending more.
But I think that it comes down to players just don't want to come to Buffalo. It's been such a bad organization for so long. The idea of being a free agent and wanting to come to Buffalo, it's just not there. And then, of course, trade clauses being as prevalent as they are, that makes it extra difficult to acquire a player of a certain experience, or of a certain who has the certain wherewithal to actually make a difference. You're not just a prospect or a guy on the IFCOM. To get a guy who's tried and true, he's probably got a trade clause, and he's not going to agree to come to Buffalo. And so the chicken's coming home to roost. Of course, they have. I'm just playing out what you're saying there, Jonah. If they do have the ability to spend up to the cap, or if Terry Pegula is giving Kevin Adams the green light to spend away, then we're clearly looking at a situation where they can't spend the money because they can't find anybody to take it.
Yeah, and if the Sabres get off to a competitive start, maybe that dynamic changes. Kevin Adams has said that Lindy Ruff's presence has maybe changed that belief in some of the conversations he has with agents. We haven't seen that play out in an actual move, whether free agency or trade yet. But if the Sabres are, in a playoff position and have one of the better records in the league halfway through the season, and then they start, investigating the trade market, maybe they get taken off some of these scratch lists that the players with the no movement clauses, because a lot of players have limited no movement clauses. So you can take 10 teams that you don't want to be traded to. So while the Sabres might not be one of the most attractive teams to come to, they only got to be a little bit better to kind of get off that bottom 10 list that they might be on some teams.
Another Western New York team that hasn't been doing anything this summer, Blue Collar U. I was asking you, I figured we should talk about it, Jonah, because it popped into my head the last time we were together at Elmo's, and I said, what happened to the TBT UB team? When does the tournament had started already? I didn't know how come I hadn't heard anything? And the reason we hadn't heard anything is because the team didn't form. One of the most successful teams in the TBT, I guess you could say in TBT history, Blue Collar U out of UB, just didn't field a team this year. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I don't think it's any one particular reason. I think the biggest reason probably is that Brian Hodgins, now in his second season as the head coach at Arkansas State, and also, starting a new family, has a new baby. I think he had a lot of responsibilities that kept him down in Arkansas over the summer, and that he was really the driving force, I think, behind getting all of these older UB players together. And he didn't coach the team, but in a way he did. He was on the bench as an assistant coach and the general manager, and was very responsible in recruiting this team to get together in the first place and leading them to that championship in the second year. And I think without him, it was a lot harder to bring everybody back together and go for it for the third year now. Adam March, who was the donor and really funded the team and really the guy that got the ball rolling in the first place, is busier with his own son playing AAU basketball. So I think while he liked the blue collar U and he's branded an AAU team that he coaches after blue collar U, I don't think he had the same commitment and the same time to spend on this team. There's probably some players that weren't as available. A year ago, they were the defending champions, and there was a lot of motivation that came back, and every player that played on that championship team came back last summer. Then after losing in an earlier round last year, and I think some of that good spirit was lost, and there was less, players leaving that gym in Syracuse when they lost saying, we'll be back next year. It wasn't the same good vibes. I think that all
Well,
came
how much
together.
of a missed opportunity, though, is it for UB or for somebody to pick up that void or pick up that slack once they realize that Brian Hodgson can't do it or whatever? I mean, shouldn't there be enough internal, like, hey, let's get some pride? And I don't want to say pride, like the pride is missing, but it's such a valuable. I mean, this time last year, Jonah, we were talking about the University at Buffalo Alumni Arena hosting the tournament because it seemed like a good location. And of course, there was air conditioning issues and things like that. But there was talk of, shouldn't they? It would sounded like a natural. And to have it fizzle just seems like a failure somewhere along the line. And again, like you say, there's a bunch of different reasons, but I don't know. It seemed like that there was an opportunity for somebody to step forward and kind of be the hero and keep this team together.
I think the real missed opportunity was University of Buffalo not stepping up and cooperating to host last year, because I think that could have created, it could have strengthened the ties between the tournament and Buffalo and that program. It could have led to maybe that tournament being hosted here again and again. I think location might have been a factor in why Blue Collar U didn't get involved. Last year they played in Syracuse. Syracuse also doesn't have a team in this year. They don't have that Boeheim's Army team that won the championship 2-3 years ago. So there wasn't maybe an obvious place for them to start in the first round, or where they would have had to play was too far away from Buffalo or too far away from where many of the players are based. I think not being willing to host last year might have strained relations with the TBT, and I don't think that got Blue Collar U crossed off the list of teams, but it made them a little maybe less favorable in the eyes. There have been years, I didn't look at it close enough to see how much this happened this year, but there have been years where more than 64 teams applied to get into the tournament, and there was fundraising efforts and things like that to actually be one of the teams that were selected. So you have to be a team that the TBT is really excited about having you in, and having you in certain regionals and certain locations and being able to sell tickets. And Blue Collar U was a big part of that a year ago and the year prior, and maybe less so coming into this year. And I think all of these things kind of work together for the timing not to be right for that team to be in the tournament this year. That doesn't mean that they couldn't get the band back together and do it next year, and maybe there's plans already in place to do that a different way a year from now. But I think all of the different power brokers involved not being as committed to this summer as they were for the previous summers kind of just led to it dying on the vine, at least for 1 year.
Anything else going on with college basketball, Jonah, just while we're on the topic, before we talk a little Bisons and Joey Votto? I know you always know the little bips and bops going on with the Big Four basketball scene and the other.
Greg Paulus is getting inducted to the New York State High School Hall of Fame for his glorious basketball and football career, being maybe one of the best multi-sport athletes in state history, and Gatorade Player of the Year. I think a lot for his football quarterbacking ability, but also being a great basketball player and going on to play at Duke. That happens this week. I haven't been over to Canisius yet, but I've heard some good things about the new roster that Jim Christian has brought in, and some excitement about some of that recruiting that he's done and the ability to get that program going back in the right direction. I don't like to analyze recruits too much before I get to see them with my own eyes. Sort of similar to what we're saying with training. I guess there's a difference in what we said with training camp, but like a lot of players can look good on paper because they used to be top 150 recruits, or they came from a bigger school, or there's just reasons in their bio that make it look like a good player. But until you see them on the floor and see how they fit with the other teammates and see if they still have that game, or if injuries and motivation has changed. But from what I've heard from a few people who have been around the Canisius gym, it does seem like Jim Christian has, some excitement built around that program. And at least when it gets into MAC play, they have a very difficult non-conference schedule. And I don't think they're going to have a very good record early on in the season, but I think that there's an opportunity for Canisius to be a competitive MAC team in Jim Christian's first season.
You were unable to participate in the previous Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK CPAs and Business Consultants podcast, when we had Bill Barnwell as the guest, because you were out at Salem Field to cover Joey Votto's arrival with the Buffalo Bisons on his journey to the Toronto Blue Jays. And that was a week and a half ago. I know you've been covering this, but Joey Votto hasn't played yet. So, which is a shame, because I think it's pretty cool. Joey Votto is one of my all-time favorite players. I just love the way he carries himself, the interactions that he would have with fans during the games. Anytime I saw an interview or a story written about him, he really is a colorful guy. He's clever, doesn't seem to take himself too seriously, but also very dedicated to his craft and an ambassador for baseball. So it's a shame that Buffalo fans haven't had a chance to see Joey Votto play yet. But Jonah, I know you've been monitoring it because you're on call pretty much if anything were to happen. But what's the latest with Joey Votto and the Bisons?
Well, the latest with Joey Votto, he's still on the team, and he warmed up with the team in Worcester today.
Worcester.
Worcester. I struggle with that word. As a writer, I only have to spell it correctly, but now as we get into more broadcasting things, I do have to work on my pronunciation of some of these things. But
only the first letter is different than Dorchester. So I've always gotten a kick out of that. Dorchester, Massachusetts, but Worcester, Massachusetts. Anywho.
Well, I'm going to pretend like this is just a bit for the show and that I mispronounce it on purpose just to set you up there. That was an interesting day at the ballpark because we went down there and Joey Votto, we got to interview him, which was nice. And he had a lot of good things to say and seemed very excited to play in Buffalo, very excited to play AAA and prove that he could still play and eventually work his way up to the Toronto Blue Jays lineup. He goes out there for infield practice. He leaves the field, but doesn't appear injured, but he walks off, goes into the dugout. I thought he was going in just to maybe change a piece of equipment or get a certain stretch that he needed, but he never came back out, never took batting practice. Not long after that, he was scratched from the lineup. He hasn't played for the Bisons since. The way that game went, the manager was going to make a comment about Joey Votto and kind of update his post game. So I had to stay there and watch that whole game. It was 0-0 through 9 innings. The Bisons win on a wild pitch.
You imagine now again,
inning.
I get it. If you want pitching, if you love pitching, I know there was a ton of strikeouts, 19, I think the Bisons had 19, the pitchers had 19 strikeouts. But if you were taking your son to go watch Joey Votto and you didn't know that he'd been scratched and you show up for that game, probably a lot of people learned that Joey Votto wasn't going to play once he wasn't in the lineup. And then you see offense is invisible. There's nothing to cheer for. And the winning run is scored on a wild pitch, a 1-0 game. What a zilch of an evening that would have to have been when it started off with such high hopes.
Yeah, I think it was very disappointed for fans who thought they were going to see Joey Votto, and I'm not sure every fan that showed up for that game saw the pregame updates that he wasn't going to play. I saw at least one fan with a Joey Votto jersey that seemed to be interested in seeing him play, and I don't think that fan was still there by the third inning. And then the way that game worked out, Casey Candell was the Bison's manager, was unable to be there for the game because of travel issues. That was the tech outage day. He shows up in the middle of the 10th inning right before they win on that wild pitch, and he's given the update on Joey Votto, but he had just got there. So he told us what happened, but there's a little bit of, wonder how much he really knows and how serious this injury is. We didn't get a real distinct medical update. An ankle injury can be, you turn the ankle and you're fine the next day. It can be a high ankle sprain and you're
And
out
that's
for
not the
several
Bisons'
weeks.
call, by the way. People shouldn't be upset at the Bisons for Joey Votto not playing. That's the Blue Jays, or maybe Joey Votto himself, but that's the
Absolutely.
Bisons have no control over that.
Yeah, and I think Bison's management was disappointed with the way that worked out. And because Casey Candel's not there, the Blue Jays field coordinator is managing the team. So he's there to make that decision. And, even though he's not a prospect that the Blue Jays are really trying to protect, they want him playing in the majors
Yeah,
eventually.
he's somebody they're trying to get to Toronto.
Right, right. So, but he's still on the team, and today he's working out, which I believe that's the first time. I wasn't there pregame for all these Bison's games last week, but I don't think he did an on-field workout before those games last week after he did the one and got hurt. The Bisons are on the road this week. They'll be back home next week. Joey Votto told a Canadian baseball writer in at least one interview that he expects to be in the majors by August, and here we are on July 30th. So I would anticipate that Joey Votto eventually gets into the Bisons lineup, hopefully plays a few games at Salem Field, because I think that's a cool moment for Buffalo baseball, and a lot of people would like to see that. It hasn't been since 1996 that a former Major League Baseball MVP played for the Bisons in a game, and I think the Bisons are really hoping to re-promote that, because they promoted it the first time, and have that be one kind of fun day or series of days at the ballpark next week when they're back home. And then if all goes well, if he plays well in AAA for a few games in a row, even not even just play well, but stay healthy and show that he still has some of his ability, I think then he gets called up to the majors for the very end of the season. But Joey Votto got hurt, I think, trotting around the bases after a home run and his first at bat of spring training. He got hurt taking infield practice with the Bisons in about less than 10 minutes of fielding grounders. I think the question with Joey Votto isn't whether he can still play baseball at a high level. It's whether he can go,
whether he's falling apart.
Yeah, whether he can stay healthy. And the whispers around, it wasn't whispered. I think the plan was for him to play 3 full 9-inning games. And if that went well, he could be called up to the Blue Jays after that. I think right now the idea of him getting through 27 innings of Major League Baseball and the workouts and everything that goes in between that without having a setback on his ankle injury or another injury is the big question. Whether he hasn't been able to stay healthy all season long, can he do that now to kind of salvage this comeback opportunity?
Yeah. Well, Jonah, is there anything else we want to talk about? Anything we want to get to?
Well, I didn't go to Bill's training camp today because I was out at UB football, their first practice. I don't know if you got any questions about that or just kind of
Not
what
really.
the vibe is down there. I don't know if they're going to be very good this year. They were picked 10th in the Mid-American Conference, which is the lowest they've been picked in that preseason coaches poll in a number of years, since 2017, I believe. Pete Lembo doesn't seem concerned with that. He has an interesting energy about him. I think he's generated enthusiasm with the players with his kind of genuine personality and his coaching ability and coaching acumen. There's some questions about the talent on the roster and how good this team really can be. I don't think they have a very high ceiling, but Lembo's coaching and his staff and his competency in that regard might raise the floor of this team. And with maybe less talented players than they had a year ago, they might win more than the 3 games they had in Mo Linguis's last season. But he's going to have some big recruiting wins, I think, to get this program back to the level it was with Lance Leipold a few years ago.
Thank you, Jonah. And thanks for everybody out there for watching on YouTube and for listening on your podcast platform of choice. Please subscribe. That matters. It allows you to be alerted as soon as a podcast drops. It allows you to, well, I don't know. I was going to say it allows you to comment. I'm guessing you can comment without subscribing, but drop your comments in there. Like us. Give us the 5-star rating, please. Do all the things that would make us happy and keep the podcast going. Let CTBK CPAs and business consultants know that their money is being well spent as our sponsor to keep us hanging around. What else?
Tim, you haven't been participating in the theme days at training camp, the outfits and Well, you haven't been there every day, but even when you have been there, you haven't really been
I
dressing up
just
like the rest
learned
of
of
us.
them. I showed up. I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt
Oh, early.
Monday, and I was told it was the wrong day. I didn't realize there was a Hawaiian shirt day. I think that's Friday. I don't know.
Friday at the stadium, yes. And I don't own a Hawaiian shirt. I'm debating whether I need to go out and buy one just to participate in this little shindig.
No. So no, in fact, I won't be at the stadium practice. I will be in studio with Carl Jones doing the WIVB Buffalo Kickoff Live show. The other dudes will be out at the stadium, and I am going to avoid the traffic for a practice. I'm going to go straight to North Buffalo and hang out with Carl, and we're going to do some Bills talk while wearing sport coats and button downs instead of khakis and BKL polos, and we'll act like broadcasters.
Hopefully they get all the electricity turned on and there's no more power outages in this neighborhood. I came home from training camp last night. There was no power at my apartment, and I'm driving around today and there's a
What's
lot of
the
street
issue?
lights out. Well, it's back on, but there was I guess National Grid said a fault line underground led to the power going out. The power was lost at the station during the newscast last night, but it happened during a break and got turned back on quick enough that it never interrupted what people saw on TV. But it took a few hours for it to go back onto my apartment. And driving around today, it was a real traffic quagmire with so many of these lights out and four-way stops at very busy intersections.
Are you safe?
Oh, I'm safe, but they got to get this fixed
Whew.
because that was some wild, unorganized intersection driving that I experienced earlier.
Well, you hang in there, Jonah. And everybody out there, especially if you're in North Buffalo, please be safe. Make sure you have fresh batteries, candles handy in case the power goes out. Get your generator up to snuff. Make sure it's got enough gasoline in it if it's one of those. End times are near. Thank you for watching / listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK CPAs and Business Consultants.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.